Hey everyone, I'm Joe. Today I'm going to be doing my monthly wrap up for September 2020. September was a pretty good month. I read a total of 5 books, which is lower than some months, but the quality of the books was all really interesting. So, it may not be quite the 12 plus books that I've read in past months at the start of the year, for instance, but regardless, it's about quality, it's not quantity, although obviously if we can have both, so much the better. Anyway, let's talk about the books. There are by 5 different authors in 2 different genres, those being science fiction and fantasy, which for me is very predictable. And the first of those 5 books I'm going to talk about is The True Queen, written by Zen Cho. This is the second book and the sequel to Sorcerer to the Crown. And indeed, the series that this is set in is called the Sorcerer Royale. Now, this being a sequel, and for the record I did a review of the first book, Sorcerer to the Crown, only about 4 to 5 weeks ago roughly, so I will link that in the description box below. This is a very good, solid sequel and a novel that stands fully by itself. Obviously, reading the first book would be massively advantageous because you'll get a feel of the world and indeed the characters in this book. Some of them you would learn spoilers about if you read this book first rather than that book. But other than that, it is a very strong book on its own merits. The plot of this one is quite simply there are 2 young women called Muna and Sakti. They wake up one day with no memory of who they are other than their names on this island far away from the UK. However, they realise that the one person they want to talk to and hopefully get help from is the Royal Sorcerer of England. So they have to make this long and difficult journey to England to access and talk to the Sorcerer. However, something happens on the way and the one sister, Sakti, disappears where nobody really knows. So obviously Muna, she continues, tries to get help from the Royal Sorcerer, and events spiral out from there, let's say. The plot is really solid and really interesting. It goes very much like the first book in ways that you truly don't expect. You've got a very distinct idea that, oh yes, the book must be going in this direction, and then it doesn't. Characters don't do what you expect. Nothing is quite what it seems, and I love this sort of misdirection in the book. You really do think and have a strong sense if you know exactly what's going to happen at all times, and nothing does. It's all slightly off centre, and I loved that about the writing style in this, because I think it is the writing style that makes it very much book that you incline towards doing this with, and yet it doesn't work. You have to constantly reevaluate what you think about the book, about the writing, and about the characters. For the record, all of those things are really strong, and this is a very strong and solid novel overall. So the second novel that I read in September, I keep almost saying August, is Fiasco, written by Stanislaw Lem. Now this is an interesting novel and a very strong novel as well. This is a relatively simple sounding plot. This is a spaceship voyage to a distant world from humanity, from Earth. They are going there to investigate and possibly have a first contact situation with an alien civilization on this world. All the people on the ship all think they are very intelligent, very thoughtful, very organised. They are. However, the name of the book very much relates to one particular thing, and that is obviously the fiasco and the sort of disaster that occurs basically by the characters thinking that they are organised and thoughtful. The only problem is being organised and thoughtful is good, but it's less good when you have only one perspective to look from, and it does not occur to you to ever think maybe you should ask around, try to get different perspectives and think around the problem. You don't just think that is the problem and just run straight into it. You've got to think around the problem and alternatives. The characters don't do that in the way that makes sense for most good problem solvers, and this presents problems. It creates a great story and great ideas. A strange writing style, which can be a bit tricky to get into. Although at this point I am used to Lem. I've read this is his 5th book I've read now. Overall, I would recommend this. I wouldn't recommend this as your first Lem book, however, because it's a little bit strange compared to even by his other standards. So maybe after a few, I mean that's what I've done, and I've greatly enjoyed this book, and it worked out really well for me personally. The 3rd book that I read in September was Tempest. This is the 7th book in the Legend of the Galactic Heroes series, written by Yoshiki Tanaka. Now, as this is the 7th book of 10 in an ongoing series, it is becoming nearly impossible for me to say anything about the book as such, other than to essentially reiterate the overall idea of the greater plotline of the 10 books, because each book is a direct continuation from the others, and this is one big plotline, one big story, and just different facets of the world and this evolving story, which I think is fantastic. Essentially, this is a human empire that has evolved from Earth, and indeed Earth is featured in the books, especially the later books, although only somewhat more lightly. You have a sort of republic group that are splintered off years ago and formed their own empire separately, but the empire itself does not like this. They have a very formal and rigid system where they control everything and you must obey. And basically there's always been issues because they basically want to attack and enslave the Republic Empire and make them come back under the Empire itself. And this presents problems. There are 2 major figures in these novels, one for the Empire, one for the Republic. They're both fighting for their own reasons and both want, their own respective areas to triumph, and it's a fantastic series. I will do an overall review of these books once I've finished the last 3, which I'm planning to make a little bit of a push off soon. Hopefully I can finish them within about 6 weeks from now, and then I'll do an overall series review at that point. Now, the 4th and penultimate book that I read in September, I read on my Kindle, so there will be a picture up on screen now, and that is Armistice, written by Lara, Elena, Donnelly. This is the 2nd book in the FinalBlowJoe trilogy. I will be reading the 3rd book in October, and I think I will be doing a trilogy review once I've read that 3rd book. So this is a tricky one to talk about, especially being the sequel to a book that by itself was quite complex and difficult to talk about. This follows on plot lines in an interesting way. This is a alternative sort of version of Earth as such. I mean, it's not Earth in any way, but this is a society like Earth, I should say. Probably in the 60s or 70s, they haven't got the technology level that we have now, but they do have some of it, just not as advanced. And this is essentially one kingdom in a state of flux, in a state of change, and there are external forces on this kingdom, and the kingdom is basically imploding. Other kingdoms are exploding and imploding respectively, and there's a lot of chaos and a lot of things going on. The central cast of characters are mixed up in each other's plot lines, each other's worlds, in all sorts of complex and weird and wonderful ways, and they're just trying to survive this change of state and change of way of living, and not without completely altering who they are on a fundamental level. So they still want to be themselves, but they want to help the greater good. It's a complex book to talk about. If you've read the first book, Envelope, which I would greatly recommend, then you'll pretty much definitely want to read this. And for the record, as of the last time I checked, this trilogy was actually on a massive sale for ebook so you might want to check that out because I got it for an extremely low price indeed, although that may have ended at this point. Anyway, the last novel that I read, the fifth one, was one that I actually only did a review of this last week, and that is Matter, written by Iain M. Banks. This is the 8th novel in the Culture universe. There are 10 in total, although this novel, and indeed none of the Culture novels by Banks, are direct sequels or continuations of each other. They just happen to be set in the same general universe of the Culture, with the same technology level and such. This is actually the biggest or thickest of all the Culture novels of the 10. And that does show a little bit, because whilst I like this, it is not my favourite. This is somewhere in the middle in terms of quality overall for the Culture novels that I've read so far. It has interesting ideas, solid writing, and it does have a few little flaws which I'll go over in my separate review, which I'll link in the description box below. But suffice to say, this is a fantasy kingdom on this world set in the larger Culture universe, which is science fiction. There is a war between kingdoms. The king is not just killed but murdered. That presents all sorts of problems for the king's children, and there is lots of intrigue and political goings on and machinations and that sort of thing. And overall, strong novel, not the strongest of Banks by any means. In some ways it's actually quite weak in certain respects, but I've talked about that a bit previously. Overall though, I would recommend this if you want to read more Culture novels, just not as your first Culture novel. However, yeah, there are much stronger Culture novels. Generally a few of the earlier ones I personally find as my favourites. This one is good if you want to read a full range of ideas from Banks about the Culture. Although some of the ideas in this, I will admit, feel as though he's done them before, just in slightly different ways, and he's sort of slightly rehashing, only very mildly. So just be aware, yeah, it's got flaws, but it's got a strong point, and overall it's a strong novel. So with that said, that's actually it for all of the books that I read in September. If you've read any of these, or you would like to, then please leave a comment. Or if you have a suggestion for a book you think I might read based on these, then again leave a suggestion and a comment, because I'm always interested to getting into new authors, new genres, subgenres, and so on. Links to the reviews that I mentioned will be found in the description box below, along with all my social media links and my Patreon. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.